a clear return of investment in everything they invest in, including coaching. And on the other hand, we are seeing a rapid rise of AI, not just as a productivity tool, but now entering the space of development, reflection, and even in some spaces, coaching itself. Now, it raises some really important questions, which is the role of coaching. What is it in this new landscape? Where does it add the most value? And perhaps even more importantly, what remains distinctly human in a world that feels sometimes that it's becoming increasingly automated? So in today's conversation, it's about exploring possibly that rub, that tension. And we'll be looking at how coaching is evolving inside organizations and what corporate clients are really asking for now, and what it takes both as a coach and an organization to create meaningful and measurable outcomes. Now, I'm really pleased today to be joined by three fantastic panelists that bring a wealth of experience. We have Sally Vazakali, and she's a master certified executive coach with over 5,000 hours of coaching experience working with global organizations. We also have Taman Wilkinson, who specializes in self-doubt, professional visibility, and helping leaders to really step into a greater authority and presence. And Lydia Wakefield-Young, a leadership transition coach, supporting leaders to navigate new roles, responsibilities, and change with clarity and purpose. Now, as you can hear, each of them will be bringing a slightly different lens to today's conversation, which I think will give us some really deep and rich insights. So let's start. And I'd love to just welcome you all today. Thank you for spending your time with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Oh, well,
yes.
Great to be part of the
my pleasure, and looking forward to it. So let's dive in, because I really want to maximize our time together today. So let's start with maybe one of the biggest questions that perhaps organizations are asking now, because AI tools are becoming part of corporate leadership landscape, or many landscapes, and as we said, productivity tools through to coaching platforms themselves. So I'd like to start perhaps with your perspective, Sally. In your experience, what do corporate clients still need, or do they still need a human coach for that AI, the things that AI just can't provide?
I loved what you said about it being distinctively human, right? And really focusing on that. What I found is that while AI can help with, asking you questions and reflection, and that's a really valuable tool. And I think that it can really help, especially before clients come to you, to prepare them for coaching, for them to really understand what they want to focus on and get them to focus in. There are many aspects of what we do as coaches that I think are distinctively human that we want to maintain. I think that, as personally, I bring adaptability in the moment. From listening to hundreds of managers, I'm able to respond to energy and emotion, and I'm able to challenge clients in ways that perhaps AI is unable to. I also think there's something about the deeply human experience that AI is going to struggle to be able to match, and the lived experience of us as coaches and what we bring. I also think a lot of my clients, they're looking for someone to listen and hold space for them, which again is something that AI might struggle with. And for me, as someone who always has my own coach, for me, coaching is about partnership and accountability as well. So it's a relationship. And as someone who plans to always have a coach in my life, there's something fundamentally powerful about being supported and challenged by another human being that I don't think AI can replace.
Interesting. Thank you for bringing your perspective on that. Taman, if I may ask you, from your experience, what are you experiencing around what your clients need a human coach for that perhaps AI isn't able to just provide at the moment?
So yes to everything that Sally said. I agree very much, and that's what I'm seeing with my clients. I would add, the world, and this is almost verbatim from what clients are sharing in the session, the world is so uncertain. And although it always has been, the world feels unsafe. It's a crazy world that we're living in right now. And so being able to speak with another human who can, as Sally said, hold space, but also things are coming up in coaching that clients didn't expect to bring, things like grief. And whilst I don't specialize as a grief, I'm not a counselor or a therapist, but being able to hold that space for someone, being able to hear what's not being said, AI can't do that, at least not yet. Now, I'm really I'm pro AI. I use it daily. Clients use AI. I mean, most of us do, but there is something, as Sally said, distinctly human that is unique to us. And I'll also say, as much as I am pro AI, AI doesn't care about people. We do. And people feel that. At all levels, people feel that. And fundamentally, as humans, we are wired for connection. So AI is great for strategy, it's great for ideation, brainstorming, all of that. But it can't hold space as a human can. And that's what
I
clients want.
love that. Yeah, I really love what you're bringing there. It can bring such a sort of a deep richness to, we know that AI is just out there and it's part of the landscape now. There's no getting away from it. But I love that sort of deep richness that you're bringing. Lydia, from your perspective, what are you seeing?
I completely echo what Zaman and Sally have experienced and what they understand. I think that there's something about coaching that's really about nuance. And I think that that's really, really important. So, yes, there is a level of what is said in their words, but also it's little things like what's happening beyond those words, what's happening in the pauses before they answer, what's happening to their facial expressions that perhaps they don't even notice themselves. Perhaps their lips turn up, or perhaps they look away, or perhaps their body sort of drops. What's in that? And we notice those as coaches. We notice those little nuances that can actually hold a lot more sometimes than words can, which AI can't necessarily pick up on and detect. And I love what was also said about relationships here. There's a huge element of trust within coaching. And I've had coaches reveal to me things that they'll admit they've never said to anyone else before. And there's also, whilst AI is great and there's huge developments in this space, there is also a lack of trust in AI for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So that trust element becomes really important in that human nature of coaching.
Yeah, those human to human connections are based on trust. I was only talking about that yesterday, funnily enough, with an organisation about how important trust is. Brilliant, thank you. We'll just sort of stick with you at the moment, Lydia, if that's okay. I just want to shift the brief slightly and just sort of build on something that Taman said around, we are in a world that is constantly changing, and we're hearing more about topics, and certainly in the networks that I move in with coaches of a whole range of experiences, topics like resilience and navigating uncertainty and managing change. In your opinion, are the conversations clients bringing to coaching in 2026 perhaps different to those that we were seeing 2 or 3 years ago?
I think that something that's become really important is around well-being and burnout, and particularly because I work with leaders who often have either experienced it previously, or because of their wider understanding of burnout, feel that they're on that edge. And so a lot, whilst previously it was a lot about like, let's do more and more and more, I think there's a sense now of, okay, how can we refine that? And I think that refining and distilling and filtering is becoming something that's more and more important. And it's thinking about, okay, how is this actually aligning with strategy? Are we doing more for more sake? Or what can we do to ensure that what we're doing is really important and is aligning with an individual's values or an organization's values? And is it ultimately contributing towards strategy rather than doing more for the sake of it, which has previously led a lot of people to burnout. And that clarity as well is becoming really important, to keep everyone focused and be more efficient as well, without that burnout that everyone is fearing a lot more and not wanting to return to.
Yeah, and raising awareness of and talking about, which is fundamentally important. Sally, what are you seeing in maybe the different topics that your clients were bringing to you now that perhaps they weren't 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, well, to build on what Lydia said, which about burnout, I'm absolutely seeing the same, not only with leaders who are facing maybe pre-burnout or really needing to be careful in that space, also the younger generation, the younger workforce coming in wanting to prevent burnout. So coming in with different priorities around flexibility, balance, remote or hybrid working, and so on. And that's reshaping expectations of what they want from their leadership or a career in itself. I also find that within that job market change that we've all seen, especially since COVID, people are staying in roles longer. So, and they have less leverage in the markets typically. So I'm seeing less fulfillment from a lot of people who might have moved on much quicker in previous times. And that's leading to more conversations around frustration, lack of fairness, although fairness is subjective, stagnation, and so on. And I'm finding that that also is leading to frustration, a lack of promotion opportunities, and then just really coaching organizations around, well, what do you do when less people are getting promoted? There's less budget. How are we going to work on our employees' well-being and more than that? And then finally, change, layoffs, restructuring, organizational change, transformation is at the forefront as well with a lot of my clients. But I'm even seeing that trickle down into more traditional companies now. It started maybe 5 years ago. There was massive change in newer companies, more modern companies, but now I'm seeing it as well in those more traditional ones too.
Interesting. I'd like to build on that actually, Taman, and something that you mentioned in the previous question when you were talking about what clients are bringing to you. We are living in an uncertain world at the moment. Things do feel, and there's the one thing that we can rely on is that things will always be changing. I think that's probably the one thing that we can say is a constant. But what shifts are you personally seeing?
Yeah, a couple of really key shifts. Whether it's connected to existential considerations and reflections, because of the vast change in a really short space of time, people are coming to coaching and they're thinking more about legacy and impact. Whereas before, it was highly geared towards external indicators of success, like promotions, like being recognized at a different level. And whilst that is still really important, people are still coming to coaching and they're still very much setting those goals. I would say 70% of my clients have a clear goal and a value of rising in their career, but also being able to contribute, to mentor, to leave something behind once they've moved on. So they want to position themselves for the opportunities that they've worked really hard for. And I do a lot of work around that. But along the way, it's okay, how can I give back? How can I give back? And I see that a lot, especially with my clients who are from the global majority, not solely, but there is a real strong desire to be able to give back to people within the organization and in their communities, to give them the support that they perhaps never had. That's one thing. The second thing is future-proofing. So we've talked about AI, we've talked about restructures, just the layout of the land at the minute, and people are questioning whether their existing skills or even their industry will still be relevant in several years to come. So there's a lot of talk around thought leadership, personal branding, and questions around, is this okay whilst I'm employed with this organization? So there's clear consideration around fit and what's possible within the organizations in which they work. And how can things like thought leadership, visibility, personal branding support them in their role whilst, complementing the organizational objectives. So both of those things really key in my space.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of align with everything that everybody has said, but particularly sort of around the thought leadership and inner leadership, self leadership. Sort of within. How do I show up my personal brand as a human being, but also as an employee here
Mm.
in this organisation. I'm going to stick with you, Taman, if you don't mind, and just sort of start thinking about the organisation as a whole. We know, and Sally alluded to it earlier. Organisations are under increasing pressure to maybe justify the spend, demonstrate impact, that type of thing. And although we all know, that coaching does. There's a huge shifts happen, impacts happen, changes happen. Sometimes it's hard to sort of get that tangible sort of evidence. So how do you work with organizations to demonstrate that tangible value of coaching to the corporate clients and the organizations you work with?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's a challenge from days gone by. So back in the day, I used to work in the welfare to work industry, and there was a lot of time spent on what is probably considered as soft outcomes, soft skills. That changed, and we began to become a lot more focused on, and I mean, the corporate world's always been, heavily focused on the external markers, let's say, and understandably, because we all want to get a return. They want to get a return on their investment. And I'm really focused on supporting the organization to think differently. So yes, there has to be some clear markers of success, but what does that mean? What is value, and how are they defining value? Is that purely about the numbers of people, how many sessions they're attending? Is it about the numbers of people who are retained? Is it about the number of people who are promoted? Because they're quite easy to measure. What's not so easy to measure, but definitely is due and deserves consideration, are the behavioral changes, and also the client's experience. What are they saying has changed? What have they experienced, and what are their teams experiencing as being different? So I'm really keen to support organizations just to think a little bit more broadly of what really is value, and what's really important. Really challenging, especially when budgets are tighter than ever. It's really tight. It's really challenging for organizations. But yeah, definitely thinking about those
The
things.
metrics are important, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's important. Yeah, for sure. I want to build a little bit on what Taman's just said, Lydia, and come to you about this value thing. What does value actually mean to the clients you work with right now?
I think it varies. And I think the challenge is that sometimes corporates and sometimes organizations, they say, oh, they want added value, they want impact. And sometimes they can't define it themselves. And I think that's the tricky thing, because then you're almost coaching the organization. And it's similar sort of when you work with individuals as well. It's like, what does success mean to you? And thinking of what someone was saying about sort of people's metrics of success are changing, but sometimes they just say, I want to be successful. Okay, so what does that mean? And you have it with organizations where they take a pause themselves and they're like, we know we should do this, but it's a moment in itself for them to assess. But for me and those that I'm working with, it's very individualized. Quite often it's about the individuals who've come to the organizations for coaching in their own development. So it's not always led by the organization, but by the individuals. And for me, that's a slight reflection of perhaps the market, whereby perhaps salaries aren't increasing as much as they could, promotional opportunities aren't always as readily available, that this is becoming an added value for the individuals, and actually being able to offer something for the own individual's development and their value, rather than necessarily always for the benefit of the organisation. So it's becoming a slightly different reason. A lot of organisations are now sort of saying, well, it's between you and the individual, because they're not necessarily always able to provide financially or provide the promotion opportunities. So organisations are thinking differently about how they can support the individuals within their organisation to support retention.
Interesting. Yeah, really interesting. Sally, from your perspective, what's important to add to this sort of element of our discussion right now?
Well, I know we keep saying this, but I agree with everything you both said. And it's wonderful it's wonderful to hear from other coaches, similar experiences. And I'm, really enjoying that aspect. And I totally agree that it can't be a tick box exercise, but we do need metrics. And I agree with Lydia that I'm also seeing more individual coaching agreements where I'm working maybe with one client and really they're offering it as a kind of bonus to make sure that they're retaining that high potential person without perhaps being able to give them the growth and opportunity that they're looking for right now within the organization. And I think it depends. Yeah, am I coaching the individual or am I coaching as part of a bigger organizational project? And I think it can change. Yes, you need, quantitative data. Might be retention, employee engagement surveys, assessment results and changes within them, or even just the goals at the start of the arrangement, right? What were they and how much progress have they made? But I think there's a lot of other, as Taman mentioned, other factors that you have to consider and human indicators of how coaching is going. That I call it the Trojan horse, right? There's the reason they come in and then the reason that they stay and the growth that they actually see and what is that. And I think it's also looking at how does the client feel, how has their confidence shifted, what new skills or behaviors are they demonstrating, how likely are they to stay and grow within the organization, how is their well-being, and looking after themselves, and maybe some more intangible aspects as well. I also try and balance long-term transformation with short-term wins, because it's very important that they keep coming and they keep investing in themselves. And I think, it's great to have more self-awareness, but we also need to look at how can we make a difference right now as well, so that they can get that buy-in for themselves, but also the organization who can see that too. And that's going to encourage more coaching, more opportunities for them as well. So that's important too, that they want to see that change in action, not just self-awareness for months and months and months with nothing else.
Yeah, so true, so true. And I do see that with my own clients and the organisations I work with as well. It's interesting, just reflecting on that. Sally, so I want to shift track a little bit more. So let's move away from sort of the value and everything within the organisation. Let's talk about our own evolution as coaches and our growth, our development. One of the things I'm a big passionate believer of is, sort of who we are is how we coach. And if we want to be the best that we can be for our clients, for them to get the outcomes and that return of investment that they are all sort of looking for, then it's important for us to also work on ourselves. So just like the client's evolving, obviously, a coach needs to evolve as well. And you mentioned earlier that, you have your own coach and you intend to continue to have a coach throughout your career as a coach. So what have you personally had to, this is a deep question, let me go there. How have you had to maybe unlearn or rethink in the way that you work as a coach in response to perhaps how you're seeing organisations changing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me personally as a coach, I've needed to learn how to live in the grey more. And definitely I tend towards black and white thinking. 0-10, my partner calls me. I'm either not in it at all or I'm 10 out of 10. There's nothing in between. So living in the nuance, living in the grey is something that I've done a lot of work on, and I continue to with myself and also with my clients as well. But bigger than that, I think one of the biggest shifts for me has been moving away from coaching in isolation and instead really understanding the systems that my client is operating within, and because it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? And I think when you're a new coach, you often do coach in a vacuum. In fact, you're kind of taught to in coaching school when you first go, right? You start with the person in front of you, but over time, you've got to evolve beyond just asking open questions, and you've got to be able to challenge more directly, share observations, draw on your own experience, identify patterns, surface blind spots, explore the systems that your client is in. And this is not often comfortable, but something that I think, we talked about the soft skills of coaching. I don't think they're soft at all. I think these are very hard skills that you need as a coach. I also pay more attention to what shows up in the coaching session and how that might mirror what's going on outside of it. So I'm always thinking about different levels in a way that I never was when I first started coaching. So I think these are often powerful entry points to deeper work that I can do with the client. And finally, I've learned to balance optimism with realism. And it's something that I always am navigating. I don't want to be cynical, but I also don't want to be optimistic in a way that becomes toxic, right? So what's the balance there? And I always want to acknowledge what's possible, but I also want to acknowledge the real constraints that my clients face at the same time.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, certainly, over the 18 years, almost 18 years that I've been coaching, I think one of the things that I let go of a really long time ago was that need to know. It's just to sort of be present and be there and just, trust the process, and that the client is resourceful. But as in the early stages of my career, certainly I felt like I needed to know the answers, which is just not where we know coaching is. Taman, I'm really curious. Tell me a little bit more about how you've evolved as a coach in response to what you see is changing in the organisations you work with.
Yeah, so there's definitely some mirroring going on. So if I think back to when I first began practicing as a coach, I wanted tools. I wanted strategies, I wanted frameworks.
Totally.
And yeah. And it's funny because clients often come to coaching and they'll say, I need a strategy for something. I want a strategy for whatever this thing is that they feel that they need to have or that they don't have enough of. And as time's gone on, as I've grown in my confidence as a coach, I've grown in terms of experience of working with lots of different clients at lots of different levels internationally, in lots of different industries. There's also been it's a refinement. I was going to say a paring down, but it's not. It's a refinement of what really matters. And the reason why I say that there's a mirroring going on, it's because in the workplace, there can be a temptation for more than is necessary. And so I'll give you some context. So I used to work in talent acquisition in HR. I also did a lot around performance development processes and all of that. And there would often be a heavy reliance on the form that was used for the personal development plan, or the form that was going to support whatever difficult conversation needed to be had. And it was my own coach years ago that said to me, it's not about the form, it's the quality of the conversation. And that does take some skill. It really does. But it's about a refinement, and honestly, less is more. So clients coming into the coaching space are tempted to come in and say, like I say, I need a strategy. But actually, when we get into it, it's not a strategy that you're asking for. It was something more around self-trust. It was something more about clarity of what are the markers that mean you're doing well. What are the milestones that show you're doing well? And that's, again, I'm using the same word, that refinement, that less is more, clients are welcoming that. And so that really matters to me, because one of my ongoing challenges as a coach is to not work so hard. It's something that I've always had to work on, to do less, because it's been, whether it's conditioning or call it whatever you want to call it, that has been a massive part of what I've had to unlearn as a coach. And so it's just one thing I'm really grateful about the privilege of being a coach is these processes and patterns that, like Sally identified, there are processes and patterns that show up in the room that are reflected in the systems that the clients work in, it's stuff that I've also had to work through. So yes, that's a key thing I've definitely had to unlearn. And there's more. There's always more, as my pastor would say.
I love that, and thank you for your honesty and openness in that, because one of the things I learned right at the beginning of my sort of career was around we are our first client. we need to be doing this work for ourselves. It's so important. We can't take our clients anywhere that we haven't been ourselves, I believe. Doesn't make it, fact, but that's just my belief, and that's the way that I work with clients. I work very deeply with the clients that I work with. But you're so right, and I think some of that, give me the strategy, I need the framework, I need the tool, comes from sometimes, and again, just my opinion, a misconception around what coaching really is. Because maybe actually they haven't really been coached, they've been mentored, or they've had directive coaching rather than true coaching. So so it's almost like we're almost, helping the client to learn what coaching actually is, so that they can get the best from it. And that starts with us, doesn't it?
Yeah. And can I add, I also
Yes,
think
please.
that when I mentioned the system earlier on, there's also something about that mirroring clear expectations, because sometimes there's a memo or a direction that, so and so, for example, needs to be more confident or whatever it may be. But actually, as you get into it, it's not that there's something more needed. It was about clarity, and it was about that person being able to be able to walk that out in a way that's aligned with who they are, that also works for the organization. So there's a lot to undo there on has been.
Totally. That's a whole new topic we could actually have as a conversation, I think. Thank you for that, Lydia. I'd love to know what your thoughts are, what you've worked on, what you've had to unlearn or unthink, or even change in the way that you work now.
I think Taman's points were really interesting around, we kind of come into coaching in the early stages, and it's all about sort of the frameworks and tools and what can I bring to the table. I've worked in the education and training sector for over 16 years. And over that time, one of the really strong things that has emerged is the importance of how everyone learns very differently. And actually, whilst we can come to the table as coaches with all the toolkits in the world, unless we are utilising the tools that are going to help the client the most, then that could be really tricky. So I've started introducing more questions into my contracting at the early stages around learning styles, about how they learn best. I think particularly now and in recent years, there's been more understanding around neurodiversity. I have clients coming to me talking about neurodivergence, and actually then that comes into, okay, how can we best work together? And while frameworks and structures might be, in the early stages might have thought, I have to work with every client for an hour at a time. Actually, for example, with one of my clients came in and they were like, an hour is going to be too long because I will talk at you and not really get anywhere in an hour. So we work in shorter periods of time, and they get more out of that because they hyper-focus during that time. And I think things like that are really interesting. So as I'm evolving as a coach, I'm really leaning into understanding the coachee, the client more, so that I can better serve them. And I think that that's something that I'm enjoying as a coach, but also I'm finding my clients are getting more out of it because the style, the tools that we're using are adapted more to actually what's going to get the most out of them and help them fulfill their potential.
I love that, and again, thank you for that. And I think that sort of connects with some of the things that Taman was saying about refining. You're refining based on what's coming towards you from what your clients, what organisations are perhaps asking for, or how they're adapting and how they're changing. Yeah. Let's finish with a slightly more, maybe challenging, I hope in a good way, and definitely honest perspective. Lydia, just to continue the conversation, staying with you, if you could say, this is the golden question, if you could say one thing to a corporate decision maker about their current approach to maybe coaching, something they might not necessarily want to hear. So I like being a disruptor. That's my style, my preferences. What would it be?
Something that might be quite uncomfortable is that the individuals who are coming forward for coaching might not necessarily want to be wholly honest with their own managers and leadership about their development areas. And that can come through different things. So working with new leaders who might have just got a new role, they obviously want to come in and sort of like have the front that, yes, of course I can do this job. But often with new leaders, what also comes with that is the self-doubt and imposter syndrome. I don't like using it because I think a lot of faculty that I've worked with hate the term, but there also comes a lot of that. And so sometimes these individuals don't always want to admit to their managers, and their managers don't always have the time as well. So there is a lot of value that comes in bringing in external coaches, whereby it's external, it's not connected to their day job, where actually they can have a very confidential conversation and build it and grow. And that's not to say that leaders and managers within their own organizations can't do a good job, but it's honestly, it's kind of like if you were younger and you can't tell your parents something, but you want to talk, you can talk to a friend about it, or you could talk to a trusted teacher about it. Sometimes we need someone external to have those confidential conversations that are outside of our structures, outside of their immediate environment, that allows them to grow and bring that back into the organization. So it's not always comfortable for organizations to accept that individuals might not trust or have full confidential, honest conversations with their manager. But that's the value of being able to partner with organizations to really bring out the best in them. And as I say, sort of being in the privileged position where people say, I haven't said this to anyone before, or haven't been able to talk to my manager about this. It allows them to bring that to the forefront, which ultimately values the organization in the longer term as well. And I think the other area that's really tricky for organizations is that a lot of organizations feel that everything's so busy and that their leaders can't take the time out for professional development. And actually, there's so much value that comes from taking a step back as leaders to be able to take the time for their professional development and bring something fresh back into the organization. If we're heads down all the time and running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, there could be so many things that we're missing, or we could be repeating bad patterns that don't then improve. So I think that time away from the day-to-day job for leaders is hugely valuable. And some organizations are reluctant sometimes to allow for that, but there's so much value.
Yeah, absolutely. And that aligns with what we were talking about earlier on being able to show return of investment, etc. But yeah, so I'm hearing a little bit about maybe even the culture of the organization there, sort of the permission to step back. And it allows people to be more innovative as a result of. And what I loved what you said earlier about the relationship, can we be truly present to somebody that perhaps there is this sort of, it's not a sort of a partnership, it is a sort of a hierarchical relationship, parent child, not obviously parent child, but there is that sort of like, oh, if I'm really honest, what might the consequences be, even if it's subconscious. So yeah, I love that. Thanks, Lydia. Sally, I'm going to really come now down to you. Get yourself to sort of think about, what you would love to say if, you were talking to a decision maker about their approach to coaching.
This is no problem for me because challenge is one of my values, so I'm ready for it. I would like to comment. I'm ready. I would like to say, Lydia, I love what you said about a few things. First is I also don't like imposter syndrome. Have you been diagnosed? Okay. I like to call it new job syndrome. Let's call it that. And it's natural to have a lot of these feelings right at the beginning of a new opportunity, new role, new project. I also want to mention what you said about that safe space for them. You can often feel a wave of kind of relief come over them when they understand the confidentiality piece of coaching with an external coach and the freedom that comes from that, and what they're willing to share, and the depth of learning and growth and awareness and everything that comes from that safe confidential space. So I just wanted to mention that. But for me, my challenge to organizations is you can't fix, coaching can't fix culture in a one-day offsite.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, too often when I have initial conversations with organizations, they treat coaching as a quick intervention on something they want to solve, like resilience or something in leadership in isolation. And every employee that sees that come up resents it, because it's not dealing with the real issue. The real conversations are not being had. I think culture is the sum of all behaviors in an organization. So without accountability from leadership at every level, then nothing's going to truly change. Just with, let's just throw a couple of coaching sessions at this group or something else. When you see the values written on their website, that's not culture. Culture's what's consistently being modeled, reinforced, tolerated, and more. So if organizations are serious about transformation, then it starts with leadership doing their own work, right? You talked about how, Sharon, that your first client is you, right? Well, leadership also starts with you and with yourself. And that means looking at your triggers, your behaviors, your blind spots, your ego, the impact you're having on the people around you, and being willing to be coached on that. And that leadership does start with ourselves. So that said, I'm optimistic, right? I have seen incredible transformation in organizations, with individuals and in teams, when coaching is embraced as not just a quick fix, but as a sustained commitment to doing the work. And it's messy, it's not perfect, as Brené Brown would say, but it's meaningful and it is possible.
100% aligned with that. Taman, it's your turn. You're in front of a corporate decision maker. What is it that they need to know, or what you would like to say to them about their current approach to coaching that they might not necessarily want to hear?
So since you've given us permission to be really honest, it's going to be stop focusing so much on surface level outcomes. They matter. We talked a lot earlier on about metrics and value. So things like, yes, performance, you want to know your staff are performing because that's the driver of your business. Communication is important, visibility is important. And without addressing those behaviors, the patterns, identity, beliefs, systems, all of that, people need permission to come to coaching and go and talk about that. So if the client knows that they can come to the coaching session and they have permission to go there if they feel they need that, but it really starts with the organization. That would be the one thing. That'd be the one thing. In fact, no, there's two. There's the second.
Go for it. Good.
And so this is drawing on something that Lydia mentioned earlier on, and it's about time. If you are going to invest time, money, and energy into supporting your workforce, support them with the time that they need to do it. Support them with the time that they need. They're not responsible for these people's diaries, but you want to reap a good return on your investment. And, so support people with the time that they need to do the work.
Yeah, agree with that 100%. Wow, thank you. Look, I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. It's been a real depth to this conversation. And, we've only covered, half a dozen questions or less, I think. And I think what's really stood out for me in this conversation is the depth and your honest sharing, everybody. Thank you so much. And whilst, we know that the world is evolving rapidly, there are lots of core challenges that leaders face. Coaching and engaging with people remains deeply human, and developing people is a deeply human thing. And whilst AI might support parts of that process, and we did have a look at that at the beginning, what this conversation for me has highlighted is that the role of coaching isn't diminishing. In fact, it's becoming much more defined in the way that we engage with organisations. Lots of focus around that today as well. For coaches and for everyone listening out there, I think it's about continuing to evolve, to stay relevant, and to deepen the impact where the work that we do. So thank you. I think I've really enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you, Sally, Taman and Lydia, for sharing your perspectives and your experiences so honestly and so openly. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who is listening to us on this conversation that's shared across the Delenta community and partner networks. It's been a real pleasure to host this conversation, and I look forward to you joining us again for a future discussion. But from everybody here, take care. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.